Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. To subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platforms, please visit us at www.thewisdomcircle.com.
Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. We are here with two people that I don't know if I had a top five, they'd both be in it. Tony's been a friend and colleague since 1978. So it's more brothers of a different mother, although he's Sicilian, I'm Napolitan. And Eli, is one of the greatest people I've ever met because I was dropped into an interesting situation. I did not know how fast and furious we would become, more friends than, colleagues and whatever. And I couldn't be happier to have you here both today. We're going to have a wonderful Wisdom Circle episode. While we wait for Miami to play next week against somebody. My daughter went to Miami. I lived on University Drive in Coral Gables. So if Indiana wins, I could also go from Mendoza. And, of course, Eli's down in Miami where Telemundo was. Tony is like hanging onto his chair about how many people were going to annoy today with my wardrobe choice, but I didn't consult. Tony, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Things are good, but this is our first podcast for the new year. So we're in finishing up on year 2. In May will be 2 years. So we've done probably about 50 podcasts. And so happy to have Eli and let's get into it.
All right. I'll do a minute before I say, Eli, what's going on with you, but because I do want to give Eli a better, I gave him no introduction really, other than as such a dear friend. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, Eli is currently executive producer of the Women's World Cup in 2027 and 31 for Netflix.
2027 for sure. Let me interject 1 second, Ray, because you always know your friends so well, but you never give their last name. It may be good for our guests to know that.
Okay, good point. Eli Velazquez. That's what we keep each other in check, as you can tell. So the cliff notes for me is I was at NBC. It was brought to me that there might be an opportunity to move to Miami and run Telemundo Sports. After they picked up 2 World Cups, Women's World Cup and et cetera, and just trying to make the division bigger. There was a guy in place, Eli, who 20 years at that point, I guess, maybe, but, he owned the team down there. He's an amazing executive producer, a great businessman, and he opened the door. In other words, our first phone call, a little salesman in him too. He's like, Ray, I know we're going to get along. I'm from New York. I'm a Yankees fan and I'm a Giants fan. I'm like, okay, this is going to work out just fine. But look, a guy who, and the way he owned the team, and there's still that team, he could have made it really hard for me, and he didn't. And I might have helped not make it hard for him. But that was one of those, this guy parachutes in from New York, what the hell? And, he was very gracious. So, Eli, how are you, and what's your take on that part? We can go there.
Well, I will tell you, first of all, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I've been a fan for some time now, so I was wondering when you were going to call. So I was like, just waiting for it. Thank you for the kind words as well, Ray. Always a pleasure to be with you, and I'm very, very happy to meet Tony finally on the podcast because I've heard great things about you as well. I think my take on that scenario. We talked the other day about pivots in one's career. That was a pivot for me, but I think it came from a self-awareness that there were things I still needed to learn, and there were things that I could garner from someone with your career path and your experience that could help me on my own. And so, opening the door was, it wasn't a roll of the dice at all, but it was a calculated move to say, hey, give this person a chance, because I didn't know what your reaction was going to be. Like, you could have come in and changed the wallpaper. I had no idea, right? But I was like, based on his history, based on what I've heard about him, give him a chance too, because he's going to teach you and he's going to make you and the team bigger and better. And that was my approach from day one. And I'm very thankful that we found one another. And there's a lot in my career that I'm going through now, where I constantly am aware of the things that you taught me.
That's great. Tony, so when Chuck Fruit sadly passed away, you took over Anheuser-Busch media marketing and the budget and the corporate level upstairs and all that stuff. What was that like for you in a company of that size? Because it's not dissimilar in some ways. I don't know if we've ever even talked about it.
No, I mean, I was 39 at the time, became, as you said, head of media, sports marketing, and entertainment marketing, and it's about a $500 million budget, and with pretty much a direct line to the president and then the CEO. For many years, we didn't have a head of marketing because we looked at the business sort of like you had this, asset acquiring sort of company that had to build the brands and use assets like Telemundo, et cetera, to do that. And then you had brand management, which was part of the packaging of the brand and creative, and then you had sales. So there was almost like three very distinct divisions that had a lot of autonomy and move forward. And the key, like anything else, I used to kid, like if I had to call someone at a high level, let's say I had to call a Ray Warren before I knew Ray Warren, I would go, well, why would they want to talk to me? I was a relatively young kid. I felt a lot of pressure. And I realized, well, you do have the power of the purse. And so they'll probably take your call. But it's about building confidence. I tell a lot of people, I executive chair an agency today, and I keep hearing sometimes from these young people, well, I don't know that, or I don't know sales, or I don't know, some division of the company. And I said, well, and I'm only using myself as an example to make the point. When I went to Anheuser-Busch, I knew one thing, which was how to buy network television time, because that's how Ray and I started. I was hired to be director of media, which included print and outdoor and radio. So you learn it, sort of on the job. And so, the takeaway is, if you have confidence in yourself, it's going to be a learning process and you're open to learning. One of the things you said, Eli, which I really liked, and I think it's important for our audience, is you got to come to these things with an open mind. You see a lot of people, not all people, but some people that say, I've got it, I know everything. It's sort of this machoism.
Yeah.
Both male and female, I don't know what the equivalent term would be, which is I got it. But the fact is, you don't have it yet. I don't have it yet. I'm still learning,
Exactly.
So, because the world keeps changing, the generational viewpoint keeps changing, technology keeps changing, attitude keeps changing. So I think one of the great things you said there was you came with an open mind, and we can all learn from each other, which makes us better people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the proverbial head, as they say. I never feel in a room to this day that I know everything I need to know. But I do approach every meeting or every discussion with an open mind to learn more about the room I'm in, to see where I, based on my experiences and my own disposition or feelings, can sort of weigh in and provide value. So it definitely begins with a self-awareness of that you don't know everything. If you ever walk into a situation with that in mind, it's probably not going to go well. In the long term, maybe short term, you might, pull the wool over someone's eyes a couple of times, but in the long term, you're eventually going to be at a situation where you're isolated to some extent because people who could help you will not want to or don't feel like you want them to. And at the same time, you're in a situation where you're sort of, faking it, right? Until you make it, right? And that eventually reveals itself. So I think it's incredibly important. And I think, Ray mentioned about, my leadership with the team that was in place. I did go into the dynamic with Ray confident in my abilities because I knew I had a great team behind me. But I also made it clear to them that this was an opportunity for all of us. And thankfully, and Ray knows them because they're now his team too. And he was our leader, and we still see him that way, all of us. they all embraced that. And so, and it went really well for us. So I agree with you, Tony. I think you've got to be very aware of your limitations before you can, meaningfully grow in your career.
Well, one of the things, Ray, I'll shut up after this, but there's a great line. I used to teach leadership at NYU, and you read 20 books. They call it just-in-time learning. And you're reading books from Navy SEALs and generals and CEOs and stuff, and you realize there's about 20 different themes that all are the same across all these disciplines. But the one thing always stuck with me is you're only a leader if people want to follow you. There's so many people that said, I'm the boss, I got the corner office, fall in line, and that's not inspirational, and no. So, and you always hear, you heard what, I don't know if it's true or not, with John Harbaugh, where he lost the locker room. Well, generally what that means is, and you can do it in the business, is you start using the same phrases, the same things, and it sort of starts to become deaf. And something you said 18 years ago as a rookie head coach to what you're saying today, 18 years later, to a 22-year-old may not resonate. And so all of us as business leaders, whatever profession we're in, have to keep evolving so that people say, you have empathy, you get it, I want to follow that, versus I don't want anything to do with it. So.
Yeah, and that brings us to an interesting point, because I realized, Tony, that, and this could be all about pivoting and resilience and landing, but you also kind of got, but I'm going to go to Eli next.
As you should. I'm not the guest.
No, I know. But I'm the host. It's my guy, so I get to be. You kind of dropped in as a professor all of a sudden now, but I want to go to that after I ask Eli this next question. So, like, again, I think this dropping into places, I dropped into OMD, and we all drop in, and like in the world of nobody gets a gold watch anymore, right? Nobody's spending 25 years anywhere. I think our audience will be doing a lot of dropping in. And so I think if we make this episode more about how you manage your presence as you change jobs, either laterally, really boring to me. Anybody ever went to the same job somewhere else? I'm like, okay, bye-bye, don't let the door hit you in the ass. But if you're leaving because you're taking a promotion or a different type of business, going from, Anheuser-Busch to NYU, or I want to go to Eli now about going from Telemundo to Netflix. I mean, those are skills now that didn't necessarily exist when people who were in place were going to be in place like for a very long time. And you kind of waited for somebody to, get hired at a higher level somewhere else. So, Eli, I think this is one of the greatest pivots and landings I've ever experienced, and I've been around, right? So a guy goes from the Spanish language television broadcast network, which we all know was a melting ice cube, literally, less immigration. Everyone who comes to America wants to speak English. So even the people who spoke Spanish were trying to watch Fox and CNBC because they were proud of their ability to speak English. And you go from this kind of broadcast network on the way out to like the global leader in content streaming. I mean, what's it like working there? And I know it's a different kind of relationship, but would love to hear what your experience has been and how that might relate to our audience as they experience their own level of, they're disrupting things, they're changing things, or they're being, blah, 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 stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I left in September of 24, Telemundo, at first there was a little bit of, shock because I'd been there for 25 years, of course. But at the same time, and again, I think going back to being open-minded, I also saw it as an amazing opportunity because of the career path I had already under my belt, the things I had learned, especially working for NBC as well, right, within the Telemundo framework on big properties and big events. I left, again, with that word that Tony said earlier, with confidence that I could pivot to something else. Now, I didn't know what that something else would be at the moment. It's not like I walked out of the building and said, I'm going to a streamer. But I did know that streaming was literally creating the issues you said for the linear broadcast side of the equation. So it felt like, okay, I need to get my name out there. I need people to know who I am. And, you know, I went through a few programs to sort of understand how to, you know, position yourself. But at the same time, Ray, I you know, to get very, very quickly to your question, I was also keeping up with industry trends to prepare myself for anything that would arise. Netflix acquires the World Cups, the Women's World Cups to 2027 and 31. And I felt like Jack Nicholson in that moment in A Few Good Men. I'm like, you want me on that wall? so I was like, I need to get in front of these people some way, somehow. And here's another thing I think the audience should know. You know, you try to make your own future by, you know, attacking these opportunities when they arise and being aggressive to an extent that you're not annoying, but that you want people to know that you have the skill sets and the confidence to help them with this new endeavor. And so my initial, you know, thing was, I'm going to DM on LinkedIn, you know, some higher ups at Netflix and just tell them who I am, right? I'm not going to sit here and tell you that that's how I got it, because I didn't get it that way. But I did have a strong network of people at NBC who knew folks at Netflix who were looking for people who had experience in this field. And that's when I got the call, right? Now, once the call was made, it became, how do I position myself for a role within this organization without coming off too arrogant because of the history I had, having done World Cups in the past, but at the same time where they understood that my disposition was to help them succeed. And at the end of the day, that's really what we want, because if you help the organization you're with succeed, that's probably going to, you know, open some eyes and raise some eyebrows, and people are going to notice that. And then they're going to also want to invest in you. And so that was my approach in the interview process with them. And thankfully, in June, I got the gig. Now, what is it like to work there? It's very collaborative, extremely collaborative. It's very focused on the member experience and ensuring that the member experience is one that they want to come back to over and over again, because obviously there's a lot of competition in the streaming field, right? And we're all in competition for people's time. I think that was what we were doing when our careers first started, and it's going to be the main crux of what we're trying to do moving forward. And so they're very focused on member experience, and they're very focused on creating moments in time that amplify the brand in special ways. And, you know, Ted Sarandos said it, he likes to eventize sports, right? That's the term that they use. And, you know, it's true. We look at big events and how we can leverage them for the members, and in a way that it creates lift for all the other things that are on the service. So, you know, very, very collaborative, as I said, and a really refreshing group that I'm working with now, because there's a hyper focus on making sure these things that we do and have the privilege to work on are special.
And they have a little bit of money to spend.
Yeah. Well.
And Tony, I'm just going to say this one thing. So I can see you've probably got the Netflix T-shirt somewhere, or a hat, because it seems like they call them members. And at first, I'm like, oh, subscriber. So the members of Netflix they're people who pay to have Netflix, right? At some level, or I guess if they get ad-free, maybe they don't. But it was an interesting word that, you know, coming out of a guy who works for Netflix, says our members. And I'm like, subscriber.
Well, when you pivot, you adapt to the culture of the company.
Absolutely. That's another word I had in my head about today, is adapting. Tony, I'm getting boring and I'm overwhelming this podcast. So why don't you...
Well, I just got to add to this a little bit. You know, it's interesting. You and I both remember the day when there was 4 networks and cable started to come in, and it was actually considered not to be competition. I remember a head of sales at a major network who was a friend said, "Oh, I'm getting rewarded on my revenue share of the 4 networks." In the meantime, money from national advertisers were streaming, no pun intended, over to the cable networks. So I said, so you've lost 60% of national TV to cable, but you're being rewarded because you increased the 40% that you're left with. And it was really the point of not understanding the business was changing. You know, we became one of the households that just unplugged cable at a $350 bill for YouTube TV. And it wasn't even, okay, bring your boxes back, you know, and I can just see it happening where, you know, the cable industry is shrinking. They're trying to get, you know, high price. They're not saying, hey, we'll cut the price in half to keep you as a customer. And in 20 years, it won't, not even 20 years, it probably won't even be there because everything's going to be to the word streaming. So really, to me, Eli, where you just moved into is really the new age of broadcasting, and whatever we want to call it, right? Because people want to select their own thing. It's more affordable, you know, to some degree. Well, to a lot of degree. And so it's just sort of interesting why industries, and we can talk going all the way back to the 50s, I don't know if they don't see the 2x4 coming or the locomotive coming down the track, or they don't know how to address it. You know, why didn't ESPN, when they had, you know, 100 million subscribers, know how to manage this process rather than leak oil all the way down to 60 million homes and try to figure it out with what they're doing with Disney Plus? Anyway, so I think one of the lessons is adapting to change, adapting to understanding what's going on in your industry, because not everyone's in the media sports industry. And underlying what Eli's doing is have confidence in yourself. You're an asset. You know, I'm talking to the broad sense of people here, and be aware of what's going on in your industry and be a part of it. You know, so because we're all evolving. And I think one last thing here, and Ray and I talk about this probably more offline than online, is, you know, we're about to have the retirement age in Social Security go to 67, right? Not 65. People are healthier. People are learning. You know, I'm down Hilton Head, and actually a friend who's been an executive recruiter, wants to be a coach, was getting coached down here with a woman. And we met for a drink, and the bar at 3:30 were a bunch of older people with nothing to do, drinking their Chardonnay and whatever else they were drinking. And it was the saddest sight I ever saw in my life. And it just reminded me how you got to keep things going. You don't want that, or I hope you don't want that, you know. And so people are going to have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different pivots. And what, to transition to the question Ray probably wanted to ask, was, after my corporate time and after producing some Broadway shows and probably doing it simultaneously, teaching is about giving back. You know, it's not about the money. And really what this podcast is, you know, we don't make any money on the podcast. It's about how can we share what we've learned and continue to learn with people, and hopefully, you know, people can take something away from it, you know. So that's why we think it's important. As I just
I'm sorry, I didn't mean
to
interrupt.
Go ahead.
I that's what I love about this podcast, frankly, right? It's sort of like an opportunity for people in this industry to really dig in deeper into the nuances of what makes it tick, but also what are the behaviors that can position someone to adapt or to engage with the industry in a way that is almost like I don't want to say a cheat sheet, because you can't cheat at this, but, you know, using quote cheat in the sense that it can help guide people's, you know, decisions in that regard. And then look, the other thing, Tony, I want to definitely call out, because it's something that I would love to do. And Ray knows this because we've had conversations in the past about it. You know, when it's all said and done, and, you know, I'm no longer in the industry, I'm no longer doing what I'm doing, in order to keep going, I want to teach, and I want to be that professor in the room. I want to give back, as you say. I want to be able to take all of this opportunity that I've had, all of these experiences that I've lived, all of the relationships that have created situations that I've had to figure out how to manage, share that with others, because, you know, it wasn't shared with me. Maybe I didn't seek it out, But I think we need that more now than ever, especially in an industry like ours, which is in constant flux and change, right? As it relates to how people are consuming and connecting with content.
Totally. And I would guess, sorry, take us quickly into I would assume a Netflix, well, you haven't done a broadcast yet, but I assume the principles of producing a game of soccer for women for Netflix versus Telemundo, the foundation of things are the same, right? Other than you want to present it maybe in a more modern, relatable, technology-driven way, right? I mean, is that, am I articulating that poorly or fairly?
Yeah, well, there's things I can say and things I can't.
Okay.
No, but in general terms, I will say, I'm sorry. In general terms, I will say, if you looked at, the Jake Paul Anthony Joshua fight, or you saw the Christmas Day broadcast that Netflix had, or streams, I should say. If you look at the the Mike Tyson fight, the Canelo fight, you can see where they're really leveraging, right? Not just those traditional or expected broadcast principles, but they're really trying to figure out how to attach innovation to that, how to attach interactive experiences to that, right? Because technology makes that opportunity available to you. It's early days in my consultancy with them as it relates to this particular event that we're working on, right? The Women's World Cup. But I can say that, I have been very excited to see their disposition for differentiating the experience from what has been done previously. Yeah. And I think that excites me on many levels, because the producer that I was early in my career is invigorated by that creative aspect of that portion of the execution. And then the experienced side of me feels like it's an opportunity to help guide to the extent that I can to ensure that those things can get done, or that we do them in a way that, the authentic football or soccer fan wants, right? So, and Ray knows about how strongly we felt about authenticity during our run at Telemundo. So, yeah, I think it's a little bit of what you already expect, because it's 90 minutes. The guys are going to play, right? It's a game, but everything that surrounds it, we're looking to make that more than what it was previously.
Cool. Ramon.
Yeah, I remember some of the struggles we had, in legacy media, getting a budget that would produce what we thought was the right kind of television. I was going to ask Eli in a teasingly way. So when you had your first Zoom call, did you have like all 9 of your Emmy Awards lined up in front of you? And hi guys, I'm Eli.
No. I think that would have sent the wrong message.
But going back a couple of loops back, cycles of conversation, because this has been vibrant, I think. The truth, I think, and Tony, you kind of crystallized it. Eli, you said the words out loud, but I think you crystallized it for me, Tony. It is about confidence, but it is about knowing you don't know everything. So when you go back to how did ESPN screw it up, or how did, what's some old car manufacturer, how did all these people not see the 2x4, right? It's because they didn't have the I don't know everything gene. They just had the confident gene.
Yeah.
And they kind of just ignored reality. And there was a period of time, 3 networks, ignored a 4th network, right? And then a 4th network ignored cable. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but what, in terms of are people ignoring streaming? I don't think so. I think they're working as hard as they can. But it's just interesting because, Tony, when you said something about how the streamers are all kind of consolidating into the new networks, I'm thinking if anybody said to me, let's do this, let's have fun. So, Tony, what are the top 4 streaming platforms you watch?
Netflix, Prime Video, Apple TV, and probably HBO Max.
Eli.
Let's see, because you can't see
Yes.
you can't see my screen behind me with all
No,
the
you-
Star Wars and sci-fi stuff. But I would say probably Netflix. Then after Netflix, I usually go to Disney Plus for Star Wars and sci-fi stuff. And then after that, I probably go to Apple because some of their series are also science fiction driven and interesting to me. I gotta say, it's a toss up on the fourth one. I don't. Beyond those three, there's not one that commands my attention. It really depends on what they're offering in the moment.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll throw mine in. It's shocking to me how little Amazon Prime I watch, because it seems like every time I go to Amazon Prime, I have to pay to watch something. Like, I don't know what they give you for free, but there's a lot of like, oh, you want to watch this movie? Yeah, great. That's $3.99 or $9.99. So, and I don't know, maybe I'm doing it wrong, Tony. You'll tell me it's one of your tops. But so it's definitely Netflix. It's definitely Apple TV. We watch a lot of Hulu, which has some great content that they build themselves. And then probably Netflix, Apple, Hulu, and then probably a little bit of what Eli said, but mostly HBO Max. Yeah, yeah. We try to watch Peacock, and so this will make a lot of people happy. When I say that there's just nothing on Peacock to watch, it's kind of a problem. Because just out of my loyalty to the company, I'm like, well, there's got to be something good on Peacock. Yeah, no, it's really not.
Let me throw in try to do this in 3 minutes. One of the things we're going changing. Well, it's on the same gear about how people don't see the 2x4. One of the biggest hindrances of innovation in business is Wall Street. Because what happens is they demand a certain revenue growth, and I saw this at Anheuser-Busch. So let's say we netted $2 billion of revenue, wanted to go up 10%. That's $200 million, right? This is an increase, so 2.2 the next year. That was something you not sold into Wall Street. Wall Street was demanding that kind of increase to increase your stock price. So now you're driven. So now when you have the opportunity to buy Beck's, Peroni, Labatt's, Grolsch, you don't buy them because it's going to affect that $200 million increased growth, which is bad business, right? It inhibits innovation and growth. Young companies.
So you're talking about those brands as companies that Anheuser-Busch might have bought, but
we looked at it and could have bought it and said no.
Right.
I mean, a whole due diligence, because it hurts the bottom. Ultimately, it hurts the bottom line. Disney probably didn't do things they should have done because they're 60%. ESPN was 60% of revenue for Disney, and said, well, we should probably be doing this, but it's going to impact that 60%, and that's going to impact our bottom line.
Right.
So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We get bought because our stock price stays flat, ironically, because we don't grow internationally. ESPN's falling down or trying to re-engineer, maybe too late, maybe not. What will be a challenge of the young companies like Netflix and others is they were allowed to grow. They were allowed to be innovative, and the revenue goes from 0 to X. So that's big growth. Now there's going to be a stabilization of some degree. And so how do you keep growing to appease everyone but still stay innovative? The people that ultimately succeed will do that and say, you know what, shareholders, you're going to take a hit for like if you went to the Budweiser wholesale shareholder in 2008 and said, here's the deal. Yeah, you can take $72 over 48 right now on a stock price. But what if we did some right things in the next 3 years and that stock price was $200? You want door number A or you want door number B? And most shareholders would say, we'll take door number B, because that's what we could have done if we did the right things. So it's a very interesting, this is my opinion. I used to, in my little voice internally in the corporate structure, say, why are we allowing Wall Street to dictate the innovation of our company? Rather than do these things and take that hit for a year. So I think that's a big thing that slows things down. I'll just put my one, editorial in. But how the Netflix of the world and the Amazons and the Apple TVs will face that. We'll face that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and how will they handle it?
But no, I think that kind of, no pun intended, closes the circle, right? It's about confidence. It's about knowing what you don't know. And then it's the Wall Street factor. So you've kind of got to manage all three of those, because you just can't go buy Labatt's and Grolsch, which I love, and things like that. So there's this tension, right, amongst all three of those things that pull at each other, some more equally than others. New CEO comes in, has to try to raise the share price, because that's why there's a new CEO usually. And so he's going to be making some 90-day decisions, decisions that affect the next 90 day before the next quarterly report. That was I thought that was really good, Tom, adding the Wall Street factor, because that's really what it is. I mean, every company has to answer to, well, not every company, but sooner or later, every company has to answer to Wall Street. And then all the confidence and the know what you don't know and the innovation. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and you just got to explain yourself. Eli, to change gears for a second, just to keep the flow going, I'm sort of curious. When we would do Super Bowl commercials, particularly, we did a hell of a lot of focus groups. So when we would become 6 of the top 10 USA Today Super Bowl spots, we really weren't surprised. We were very thankful, but we sort of did enough research to test our commercials, or the theory of our commercials by storyboard, to know how the consumer would react. It wasn't by surprise. I'm sort of curious, and this may be a left field question, as you look to present sports without you having to identify what that look is, do you look at input from the consumer? Like I did read, and you had nothing to do with it, that the consumer didn't particularly like listening to an interview with Emmitt Smith as the game was going on, right, for 5, 7, whatever, 8 minutes. So will you listen to the consumer as you build these things, or do you trust the internal mechanism of producers to know what the consumer wants?
No, I think it's more the former. We definitely, and again, going back to those things that I learned over time and together as well with Ray, doing consumer insights and understanding what they want is critical to a successful execution. It's critical to telling effective stories. It's critical to, building a great set. It's critical to leveraging AR or VR. You really need to know what your consumer expects in order to ensure, right, that you have a meaningful engagement. And, that can't be just the heads in the room with ideas or gut feelings or gut takes. Now, there's a place always for gut, right? Because, there's something to be said for the experience that one brings to the table. And so not every consumer insight, at least in my personal opinion, is necessarily going to be one that we're going to pull the trigger on. It just depends on how strong of an insight it is and whether that makes sense for the broadcast and the authenticity we talked about earlier as well. And look, it depends on what the actual execution is that would, feed into that particular insight. But it's much more of a, what do they want and how can we deliver it dynamic, that we're, that at least I know that I'm pushing for on my side. And then the other thing too, I would say is that, working with narrative storytelling, if you want to have a meaningful engagement, if you want to, if there was an interview that they did that was criticized in the press, or if there's an execution or a studio portion that people found less exciting than other parts of a broadcast, you learn from that, right? Because the other thing too is you don't want to be handcuffed either. If you think that you want to try something new that maybe even a consumer insight doesn't even know exists yet, right? And so those are the moments where you take chances and you put your cards on the table, and then the fallout comes inevitably on all executions. And when you hear about that fallout, you weigh that against your next execution and the one after. I used to say early in my career, and to people, in television, whenever we would have an execution that maybe was left wanting, or we did something that we shouldn't have done, or maybe wasn't as good, I would always tell the guys, hey, we always have a second chance to make a first impression,
Mm-hmm.
which it's counterintuitive, but television affords you that opportunity. Sports in particular affords you that opportunity.
That's where I was going to go.
Every week there's a new team playing. Every year there's a new champion, typically, unless there's a dynasty going. There's such a fluidity there that allows you to try new things and react to those mistakes. But yeah, consumer insights are critical, I think, to successful executions.
So we're going to probably do the next few minutes for about into the close to the 45-minute level, which is, I mean, you do this. The thing we have to, why we do this, Eli, because we could all do this for another hour and a half. Yeah. But I don't want it to be that, although I wouldn't mind if it was the Kelsey podcast, but, you know.
We want to maintain attention span is our goal.
Right. So the two things that you said that I think, you know, and maybe, Tony, this is one of the issues with consumer products versus sports. People who love Budweiser are not as elastic, and I'm making this up, so feel free to correct me, but I always said two things, and Eli, I know I had it on my wall, punch board thing where you pin notes, and it said, if you serve the fan will serve you. And I think there are people crossing lines left and right now, and I'm not sure this fan's always being served, and we'll see how that turns out. And so maybe a Budweiser drinker isn't as elastic to go buy Grohl, sure, but I don't know. That's for you to say. But I think, you know, the other part of it really is they come back, right? So if you're serving them and you misserve them, you know, Eli talked about things that didn't go so well. They're nothing, especially with football and regional sports networks and other sports, but nothing's coming between the fan and his team or her team. So you get a lot more room producing sports maybe than you do in the corporate consumer product world. Tony, what's your take on that?
Once you lose the consumer, you never get them back. Okay, and the best way to put an analogy is 30 years ago. From 30 years ago to today, Budweiser has lost 75% of its volume. Right? What took it? Bud Light took it. You know, because to think of Bud Light as new technology, new business, whatever, right? So the old brand, as great a tradition as it had, was beaten by its sister, if you will, or little brother, and it took its volume. You know, now Bud Light's lost a lot of volume because of some of their marketing issues. But once the consumer leaves, they don't come back. They go to something else. And what I observe with sports is no commissioner, no team owner, etc., is worried about, in my opinion, the quality of the brand. It's about how do we drive revenue, right?
Yeah. Right.
You know, let's think about an 18th game as players are breaking down on game 16 and 17 with injuries because it's too long. You know, let's add, you know, another night. Let's do this. What's keeping ratings up? So the NFL will say our ratings are up. They're up big from, what's keeping it up? Gambling. In my opinion, you know, if people, it's state, it's keep involved, people going back and forth, you know, so there's a lot going on, but is that ultimately making sure that the quality of the game is high? The minute you lose your number one quarterback, you're done. Should the league really be serves that way? That there's not enough quality players that your first quarterback goes down, and then you're likely not to win a game with your backup.
Yeah.
You know, so
and I think to your point, they don't care about the brand as much as they care about wins. Winning
they
is
care
the
about
brand.
revenue. It's revenue driven.
Well, that's what I mean. Right.
Yeah. So
like the playoffs, like the Super Bowl.
Yeah. So that's to me. I used to be accused by our president sometime that he said a lot of your views are sort of like socialism. You're trying to bring everyone. I said, well, it's like, I know we're a capitalist society, but you also, to keep growing, you got to keep everyone healthy, and I feel that way about society. Do you really want 60% of society that can't pay their bills, or 70%? No, I don't think you do. Anyway,
that's another podcast.
Got about a minute here. So Ray, wrap us up. So before I go down,
Yeah, I can feel I can see the 2x4, Tony. I can see the 2x4. Listen, this has been great. Again, we could go on for another hour and a half. Eli, is there anything we missed that you wanted to talk about? Or, we talked about the journey. We didn't get a lot about the journey, but we heard, a little bit. Oh, I have to make one shout out to a man who may or may not see us, but the three of us are all connected by a guy named Joe Uva.
Oh, yeah.
Tony, I met Joe going to one of your golf outings in the summer when you had that beautiful club and the great cabins and all that stuff. Joe and I sat next to each other on a bus going to play golf. And, he was a big name in sales, huge. And that's how I got to know him. And we instantly hit it off, as you might imagine. Then Joe hired me at OMD. Then Joe put my name in the ring to go run Telemundo Sports. Joe was leaving as the head of Hispanic television for NBC. And he said to me, look, they're looking for somebody to go down to Miami. Would you want me? I don't want to put your name in if you're going to say no. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to Joe because he's pretty important, I think, to all of us. And he's just a good human being. But Eli, back to you. Last word. Go for it.
Yeah. So I have to say yes to Joe Uva. Thank you. I mean, he's the one who obviously also gave me the opportunity at Telemundo to be the EVP back in 2015 and set me on a course as well. Really great guy and a friend to this day. Look, last word. I get a sense from the podcast on how, you're trying to help young people. And so, I've always felt like the message that I would give, and sometimes I have people reach out to me on LinkedIn now or, through email to ask for advice and things of that nature. I think we captured it on this podcast, which is, on your path towards achieving your career goals. Yes, it's great to remain focused on what those goals are and what you want to achieve. But in parallel, you have to understand the industry where you want to achieve them and what the headwinds and the tailwinds are. And I think that's something, if I was, my younger self, I probably would have told my younger self, read more trade magazines, understand, what's going on in the industry, know what business factors move people one way or another, and how to position yourself in association with those trends to help make yourself more versatile and marketable to people who are looking for talent. I was very, very fortunate to have a career during the infancy and rise of Spanish language media, and where a lot of that stuff we figured out as we were going. And so, I was tapped on shoulders to try things moving down my career, and I did that. But hey, I never expected or assumed for one moment in time that I'd be in the position that I was in, have the experiences that I've had, and I'm thankful for them and very, very keen on making sure people can benefit from whatever I can share that they find meaning in. So having this opportunity to be with the both of you, to have this conversation has been a thrill for me, and I'm very excited to have participated and want to just thank you for the opportunity.
Well, you are very welcome. We will drop this episode I'll hear this on Wednesday when it goes down, but, it'll be produced by our wonderful producer, Ramon Ramos, and cleaned up and tightened up and all that good stuff, but not edited. And that's great. I'm good. Eli, Tony, you good?
Yeah, thanks, Eli. I appreciate it. I think it was a great conversation and look forward to keeping in touch. Thanks, Ray, for co-hosting.
Thank you.
Did the best I could.